Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my 2021 Am Reading finale. I suppose it's not too surprising to say here that you won't be getting another Am Reading update from me until 2022. But before I sign off on Am Readings for this year, I figure I will do a brief update on how I hope to end 2021. Starting with the book I actually finished this week. This is BASHERT by Herb Fried, which I picked as my page 112 tag book. I was very hopeful given page 112, and alas, this book did not live up. That was a very rare page that, gave an impression of the book that was completely inaccurate to the rest of it, or largely inaccurate. It's one of those things about the page 112 tag when you judge it based on the writing. You don't get a lot of context for the rest of the story, but you hope that the writing is the same in the rest of the story, and it really wasn't. A lot of things about this book really just were off. The back copy didn't really match what the book is about. The characters are completely bombastic. I just couldn't fall for them, even though we have these situations that could, be well done. They weren't here. They weren't. It was, the story is about, Besheart is a Yiddish word for beloved, so it is a story about two lovers, and particularly a lot of it focuses on after the woman Marion dies and the man Dan sort of trying to reunite with her, and there's a whole supernatural sort of plot, but it just did not work for me at all because the characters weren't authentic to me. Yeah, it's a bit of a disappointment. I mean, and there's other things as well. I just feel like, structurally the novel was a bit too all over the place as well. And there was also a little bit of like magical Negro-ness, I think, coming into this. And I have to say, this does seem like a auto-fiction book. I don't, I feel like, sometimes when you insert yourself into a book, it doesn't quite come out the way you hope it would. Although Dan and Herb Fried certainly have an interesting life behind them. They were rabbis who left the pulpit and then became Hollywood directors. Pretty cool, but was not enticing the way that it came out in this story. Not at all, not for me. So, there we have it. And now I'm in the middle of, or maybe 3/4 of the way, 2/3 of the way maybe, through Flesh and Blood by Michael Cunningham, which is the third Michael Cunningham book I'm reading this month, the final one, although it's actually his second published book. And this is very interesting because there's things about this book that might not work as well, or maybe are straining things a bit, and this is when Cunningham was a younger writer. I don't think he quite necessarily found his complete stride yet. I mean, this is a sprawling book. It's over 400 pages long, which in literary fiction is kind of long, but it takes place over 100 years following 3 to 4 generations of a family. We have very flighty chapters following most of the family members as POVs, and we just sort of skip through the years, but I say it takes place over 100 years, but really we're focusing most concretely, I think, on the 60s through the 90s. So yeah. And we're following this family, the Stasos family. In the 40s, they're made up of a Greek immigrant Constantine, who marries an Italian-American, first generation American, Mary. And so then they start a family together. They have 2 girls and 1 boy. And we follow them throughout their lives and until those boomers or parents themselves giving birth to my fellow millennials. I see myself like generationally. I know where I am. I know where my parents are. If we are to map to these generations. And yeah, I mean, I think it's very engaging. Cunningham does very well with characters, although I do think, I would say he does very well with the characters he focuses on. There's a lot of characters, and I mean, maybe this is to say that 450 pages isn't actually that much for, taking care of 5, 6, 7 characters and trying to understand who they are. I definitely think the strongest characters in the book, the strongest tension, comes between Constantine and his son, Billy, who he becomes Will, and Will is effeminate and he's gay. And Constantine is very much a gruff and even violent man sometimes. He can't really rein in his emotions. He doesn't know how to do that. He, he is what we would call toxic masculinity. It's affected, his life and the lives of his family around him, because, that's how men are often raised. And then we have the two daughters who are going through interesting stuff as well. And I think, there's decent characterization, but I don't think it's quite as strong. But I am liking it. I feel like it's a little, is unfocused the right word? Or maybe it's just, not as strong for everybody. But the writing, you know that he has the skills here, and that a lot of them are already in play. Though it's interesting to compare to By Nightfall, which is what I read of him more recently, and it's a much more recent novel that he wrote, which is much smaller and much more contained, and more of a slice of life in the way that he digs into characters within a short time period and really gets into who they are. I think it's interesting because, this feels a little bit like the opposite of that. Although I guess then The Hours, which he's most well known for, might be in the middle somewhere, because obviously that's 3 different time periods. And but anyway, basically when it comes to Michael Cunningham, I am enjoying him. Maybe I should stop rambling, because I hope to make a video about the 3 books of his I read this month in the new year. Next, we come to the Foundation Trilogy, which I have started, but I'm not very far into. I'm not even through the first book yet. Not exactly enjoying it as much as I hope to, and I think it comes down to the fact that I'm not too enamored by Asimov's writing. I just watched an interesting video actually by Daniel Green where he analyzes modern classic science fiction and fantasy, and its legacy and what things have changed now, and I feel like I'm kind of on the same page with him in a lot of ways, because I feel like there's a lot that I enjoy much better about fantasy now, and science fiction in particular now, because it really was mostly hard sci-fi science theories. I think that's what he's good at here. In terms of character and even just writing, it's not that great, and Daniel Green really tears Asimov a bit of one. He mocks him a bit in his video, so I'll link that down below. So anyway, I am rambling. I said I wouldn't, but I am. And I do still want to finish this. I'm still, intrigued by it. I just think I'm gonna, can slow it down a little and finish it in January instead. So another book I've started on audio is this one. This is The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna, which is a YA fantasy that came out a couple of years ago. It became, I think, kind of popular, although then I've seen some mixed reviews, and I guess I have mixed feelings about it. Speaking of science fiction and fantasy tropes, this one more of a modern one, YA modern one, I suppose. It's about a young girl who is completely out of sorts with the rest of her society, and there's this big test that comes up to say, like, can you become an adult member of our society, or will you be cast out, where they test for their blood if it's red or gold, and hers of course is the dreaded gold, and it means she's impure, and this is a very purity style society, and she's cast out, although actually she is sought out by the emperor's people of the kingdom she's a part of, because her impurity actually means she's a bit of a supernatural person, maybe the descendant of demons, in fact, and so, when you have demons in your world, maybe you need partial demons to fight them. So she's recruited into this brutal sort of army. And so this is all very archetypal stuff, and I feel like the writing really doesn't elevate it that much from that. It's just kind of, on an average plane, I think. But that being said, it's the end of the year, and maybe something that's easy and, somewhat fun. It's kind of nice to end with that. But I did pick this up in part because her sequel is coming out this year. And I'm looking for YA fantasy and YA sci-fi that I want to read, front list. And I don't know if I actually want to go on to the next book. So I guess my quest will continue. It's probably way too early to get worried about not reading enough front list from 2022, considering the year hasn't even started yet, if just. So that's where I am with that. Future Rachel here, and yikes! I almost missed out on one of my biggest 2021 traditions, which I start my Am Reading videos with. I guess this one I'll end it with. I read one short story from this collection of Dorothy Parker's short stories. The final 2021 short story I read in here is called The Cradle of Civilization, that was published in 1929. It's another dashed off man and woman ignorantly talking to each other thing, except this one takes place in the Riviera, which is known as the Cradle of Civilization, and Parker does start with a bit of intro about all the historical things that happened there before she gets into this ridiculous couple. Who basically are personifying the stereotype of absolutely atrocious American travelers. They're racist, they're ignorant, they are completely disrespectful. I mean, that's a mild word for it. They break things, they hurt people's property, and they laugh whenever these other people, mostly French people, are upset about it. To a degree, I feel like maybe it went a little too far. Like, okay, how many examples of completely shitty behavior can you have in just 2 pages? But can't deny that that's the stereotype, and I think it's a little bit laid into reality. So there we go. Let's try not to be like these people, Americans. Make this our 2022 goal. And speaking of 2022 goals, I will continue to read from this collection in my Am Reading videos, so stay tuned for that. So that about covers it for me now. Again, I will leave Daniel Green's video in the description, because if I'm going to ramble on a little more, I should say it was interesting to listen to him, because I agreed a lot with the fact that I think that modern day science fiction and fantasy often is very strong and is doing new things in the genre that he talks about. And that I especially am happy that science fiction has moved away from just hard sci-fi theories and more into good writing and good characterization. He also talks a bit about the poetry of classical fantasy, like a la Tolkien and Lewis, who were, after all, scholars, particularly of fairy tales and poetry. So that came out a lot in their books. So that's something I wouldn't mind keeping in modern fantasy writing, just saying. Yes, these are my final reading ruminations of the year, writing ruminations. And speaking of writing, I will be back on this channel very imminently to do my quarterly wrap-up for my autumn writing goals. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.